Thank you very much. So yes, I'm Rachael Kotarski from the British Library, and as my obligatory background slide, as I have come to you from outside your wonderful city and country, for those of you who don't know the British Library, we are the National Library of the United Kingdom. This is our St Pancras site in the north of London. We have a lovely Gothic-style hotel next door with lovely red brick, which meant that when our building was built throughout the 80s and 90s, we had to use the same red brick, which means that some people confuse us with a post office as well when they walk past us in the UK. As the National Library of the United Kingdom, we are a legal deposit library, so that means every item published within the UK that is written text, we are due to be sent a copy by publishers of that material. Since 2013, that also covers electronic materials as well. But essentially what we have are what you might expect: newspapers, periodicals, journal articles. But actually we are much more than that at the library. We do actually have artworks ourselves. So this sits on our front piazza near the front entrance and is a work by Anthony Gormley. We also have audio-visual materials in various carriers, both physical and digital. And as I mentioned, since 2013, we have a right where if there are printed materials that are also available digitally, publishers can send us either or. They don't have to send us both. They can send us one or the other. But what it does mean is that, and I don't know if that video will play. No, it will not. Never mind. We take a copy of the UK web domain once a year. We take it more often in some areas of special interest. So if there's an election, we will collect party political websites more frequently. But essentially, we can take a copy of any website published in the UK once a year. And so as you can understand that, digital content-wise, that expands our collections greatly every time we do a crawl of the UK web domain. But with the content that we sit on shelves, we tell people that essentially we get 7 kilometres of shelved new material every year at the British Library. So that content does not continue to diminish, even though we are still also collecting digital materials as well. So as the National Library of the United Kingdom, we have a statutory duty to support research within the UK. We are not a public and lending library. People have to come on site to use our materials. That's actually part of the legal deposits legislation. We can't make our legal deposit content available off-site. Unfortunately, that currently also includes crawled web sites. So you actually have to physically come and see us if you want to access the web archive. But as well as supporting anyone who wants to do research, literally anyone who walks off the street and has proof of ID and address can come in to use us as a service. But actually, our staff are researchers in their own rights as well. So we, during the period 2017-18, were involved in 50 externally funded research projects to a total value of 49 million across all those. In terms of this pie chart, the bits in yellow are the ones where we have staff who led those research projects. So we are also producing our own research outputs that come from our collections. And we have recently become involved, and the reason I'm here to talk to you today, in a new UK government-funded initiative called Towards a National Collection. So this is about breaking down silos, and I'm glad Josh used the nice silo image, so I don't have to. Here, breaking down silos where bits of the UK National Collection are held, and also enabling new ways of searching and accessing that. Our specific project that I'm here to talk to you today about is regarding persistent identifiers and how you can use persistent identifiers to break down silos across the National Collection. But one of the things that we want to do is have a focus on the various uses you can have of that collection, because actually if you think about all the various business reasons that you would have to use any kind of infrastructure, let alone persistent identifiers, you could just keep running forever and never really kind of define and have a scope for what we have as a 2-year project. It would just be impossible. So we're very much looking at how you interpret collection items as research objects and how you put them in a research context. So, we have catalogue records about the content that we hold. We may have digitized interpretations of those, but actually some of that is about using the collections that we have, both physical and digital, as data in a way. So where we may digitize large parts of the collection, we can bundle it up and offer it to people as a data set in its own right for people to use at scale. So I mentioned our project. We are a very short project. It's only 21 months. These are the partners. So the British Library is leading this work. We are working with Royal Botanic Garden, Edinburgh, London National Gallery, University of Glasgow, the Victoria and Albert Museum, Science Museum Group, and Natural History Museum Group. So when we think about the heritage collections that we have across the UK, this covers not just what we have in library-like heritage collections, not just what we have in art gallery-like heritage collections, but it runs the gamut from libraries to art and through to scientific heritage as well. So, you know, for things like the specimens that we have at the Natural History Museum and the actual biologic data that Royal Botanic Gardens in Edinburgh have. So the project's about persistent identifiers, but I want to say that we have a very specific interpretation of what we mean by a persistent identifier within the project. So it is something that provides a stable and long-lived link to an object, and I've put two examples here. So here we have what might be familiar to people at the top as a digital object identifier, and we also have an international standard name identifier. So these strings that I've put on the slide here initially are essentially the identifier itself. But within the project, we really want to talk about ones that we can actually use as links. So when we talk about persistent identifiers within the project, we're not necessarily thinking of identifier strings that might be accession numbers, but they actually have to be actionable. So a user can actually use it to access an object or information about it or a representation of that object. They should be globally unique. So the whole string of that identifier should not clash with any other person's identifier accession scheme that they have within their organization when you put it out there on the web. And they should be persistent. Persistent in terms of persistent identifiers themselves, it's not necessarily the technology that makes an identifier persistent, it's actually the organization and management of that technology that enables the persistence. It doesn't just emerge out of actually having a persistent identifier. You need people who are in place to say that they will ensure and pass on the responsibility to ensure that this link continues to work if that organization disappears. So when we talk about the British Library, we have the Chinese oracle bones go back thousands of years. We know that that material will continue to last for thousands more years. We have vellum materials that we know have lasted for hundreds and hundreds of years. The digital materials we know have lasted maybe 50 years, and we have no idea whether we can sustain them for another 50 years, let alone another 1,000 years. But what we want to make sure is that when people are referencing the items of ours that they use within their research, that they can use a persistent identifier to point to that and say, these are the people who have it now, here is where you can access information about it. And we hope that we will manage those links to make them last for as long as we can manage the objects for. So within the project, because it's short, it's not necessarily about implementing persistent identifiers at the organizations that we're working with. It's actually about looking at the benefits of persistent identifiers for the business needs, essentially, that we have within the partners on the project, and kind of looking at how persistent identifiers can drive innovation, but also coming up with recommendations at how we can take a step forward in the use of persistent identifiers. We have various challenges and questions that we hope to answer throughout the course of the project. We're going to be having a set of workshops, and hopefully, although all these workshops are kind of based in the UK, they're very much about UK collections, we'll also do summarised webinars of each of those workshops that we can share more internationally and globally. And so I'm not going to go into the detail of some of these challenges and questions right now, but I will point out especially the bottom one, because I feel like this is something that has kind of come up in a few talks today. Where we are putting persistent identifiers on our collection items, what does the community, whether within our own community of heritage organisations or the communities of peoples who have created the objects that we hold, what do they interpret by us saying that something has a persistent identifier? Do they think that we as the holders of that information are giving it an identity that they didn't intend? And I think this is kind of a big question for us, because we're talking about things that are permanent and persistent, and necessarily might not change over time. We've got to be very careful about how some of those statements are interpreted by the communities that we work with. And I think around implementation, about scalability and sustainability of what we're doing. So there is a potential, and the Natural History Museum in London are already doing this. They are assigning digital object identifiers to every single specimen as they digitize it. So they will, for instance, end up with potentially hundreds of thousands of records with persistent identifiers that relate to grasshoppers, for instance. And the British Library is working on a completely separate project to this, to look at building a common shared research repository across peer heritage organisations, where we have a joint search across some of those collections. And so if we had a user who came to us looking for artworks that included grasshoppers, and they did a search, they will get hundreds of thousands of records of just photographs of grasshoppers, and that's not what they're looking for. So something about that sustainability and scalability, and actually what is the impact if we start assigning persistent identifiers and enabling people to find things at a granularity that they might not have been able to do before. There might be hidden consequences of some of that. But ultimately, we do want to realise the benefits of having persistent identifiers. I won't go into my 4 bullet points here, but actually what I do want to emphasise is that realising any of the benefits of the use of any new piece of infrastructure or technology is about enabling organisational change. And so that's why the concrete outputs of our project that we have are around in fact, no, I'll go on to this bit first. We don't want to tell organisations what to use. We want to learn from what organisations are already doing in terms of persistent identifiers. So as Dave mentioned, I came from a science background. I'm technically not even a librarian. So, I know how we have used persistent identifiers to support the publication and the understanding and the provenance of research, if you like, and I'm only just starting to learn about how persistent identifiers may support provenance in the sense that you all guys in here mean when you talk about it. So what we don't want is me as a kind of outsider and an interloper telling you all what to use, because why would you listen to me, right? What we want to show is demonstrate what the benefits could be to you all of various pieces of persistent identifiers, and allow you to make your own decisions about what would be appropriate for the management of your own collections and the business needs that you have. It is about skills and knowledge sharing. So Royal Botanic Gardens in Edinburgh already have an approach to persistent identifiers, and so they are part of the project so that they can come along to our workshops, they can demonstrate their own case studies and share what they have learnt with the wider community, and each of the partners on the project will be doing that through the workshops and the write-ups that we have. And again, it's about generating a toolkit for organisations to support your decision making. So again, it's not, oh, you must use this hammer to crack a nut. It's actually understanding, giving you a way of describing your business needs and being able to articulate them to the technology side within your organisation, so that as an organisation, you can decide which is the pathway you want to take for the use of persistent identifiers. So that's me. Thank you.